Okay, Bang Si-hyuk, the chairman of HYBE, aka Hitman Bang, was questioned by police yet again for over 13 hours earlier this week on November 5th. And this is third summons since the investigation began. Okay, and over the past few months, nearly every claim against Hitman Bang has already been examined, cross-checked, and in many cases addressed through public records and investor data. Yet, the story continues to make headlines, often without much of new information. So today in this video, we're going to go over why the investigation has dragged on for months and what the core allegations actually are and how the facts stack up against the claims. And we'll also explain why so many legal and industry experts believe the case is more about perception and procedure than any proven wrongdoing. And by the end, hopefully, you'll have a clear picture of where things stand now and what's been confirmed and what's likely to happen next in the Bang Si-hyuk investigation case. Okay, so let's start here with this article titled "Bang Si-hyuk questioned for 13 hours leaves without comment." Came out on November 5th. Police reviewing whether to request an arrest warrant after analyzing his statements. So that's the subtitle of this article. HYBE chairman Bang Si-hyuk, who is under investigation for alleged fraudulent trading during the company's IPO process, was questioned by police for over 13 hours on November 5th before returning home, the article starts. Bang Si-hyuk appeared at the Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency's Financial Crimes Investigation Unit in Mapo District around 10 a.m. So 10 a.m. on November 5th, and concluded the session at approximately 11:15 p.m. Wow, that's longer than Jungkook's live stream. 13 hours. He exited the building with a stern expression, and did not respond to reporters' questions, such as, "What did you explain to investigators? Do you admit to deceiving investors? And will there be additional questioning?" before leaving in a vehicle accompanied by security personnel. The article says this was his third summons following two prior public questioning sessions in September, which we have already covered on my channel. Police are now expected to review the investigation records so far to determine whether to seek an arrest warrant. According to investigators, Bang Si-hyuk is suspected of misleading HYBE investors in 2019 by saying that blah, 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 blah. Do you want to actually hear it? Because, yeah, this tidbit is included in every article because they have nothing else to end the article with. Nothing fresh. But it says, by saying that the company had no plans for a public listing, then selling shares to a private equity fund, and later proceeding with an actual IPO. Police believe Bang Si-hyuk earned around 190 billion Korean won in unfair profit after allegedly receiving 30% of the fund's post-listing sale proceeds, as stipulated in a confidential agreement made in advance under Korea's Capital Markets Act. Obtaining financial gains through deception or fraudulent schemes in connection with financial investment products, including unlisted shares, is prohibited. Violations that result in profits exceeding 5 billion won can be punished by life imprisonment or a minimum of 5 years in prison. Police reportedly received intelligence about Bang Si-hyuk's suspected offenses late last year. In June and July, they executed search and seizure operations at the Korea Exchange and HYBE headquarters and imposed a travel ban on Bang Si-hyuk. Bang Si-hyuk maintains that all procedures during HYBE's IPO were conducted in full compliance with relevant laws and regulations, and that there were no legal issues. Okay, so that was the article. Nothing new, nothing significant besides the fact that he was questioned for over 13 hours. Straight for the third time, for third summons. Okay. Now, a few weeks earlier, police officials had already hinted at the slow pace of the investigation, and we have already talked about that. So even before his third round of questioning, investigators had openly acknowledged that the probe was moving slowly. And what they would say? At that point, it was becoming increasingly clear that the case was losing momentum. The police themselves seemed to be recognize the limits of what they could uncover showing that the inquiry had entered a phase of cautious legal review rather than active discovery. And this was reflected in an article published on October 20th, just 2 weeks before the November 5th questioning that we just read about, where the Seoul Metropolitan Police gave their most honest assessments of the situation so far. So let me briefly go over this article again. The title, No Progress Yet. Police. So it says, Police, no progress yet in Bang Si-hyuk's alleged fraudulent trading case. Still under legal review. This was published on October 20th, 2025. Police have stated that there has been no significant progress in the investigation into HYBE chairman Bang Si-hyuk, who is under suspicion of fraudulent trading. At a regular press briefing on October 20th, an official from the Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency's Major Crimes Division said there's nothing in particular that has advanced. As reported, additional questioning took place, and we are carefully analyzing the materials and statements we have obtained. We are also conducting a legal review. Analyzing forever? Bang Si-hyuk first appeared for questioning on September 15th, where he underwent more than 14 hours of intensive interrogation. At the time, he left without responding to reporters who asked, what explanation did you give regarding the 190 billion won in unfair profit? And is it true you provided false information about the company's IPO plans to gain profit? And before entering the building that day, Bang Si-hyuk briefly told reporters, I apologize for causing concern. I will cooperate faithfully with the investigation. A week later, the article says, so this is basically doing a summary of what has happened before, right? A week later, on September 22nd, he was summoned again for more than 12 hours of questioning. Regarding this second session, police explained there were additional matters to confirm following the first interrogation, and we're also analyzing seized materials and questioning relevant parties. The police have also imposed a travel ban on Bang Si-hyuk. Okay, so that's basically the article. I'm not gonna read the last part, which is basically the same thing as how other articles, end, which I have already read you about the so-called allegations. Wait, so if you sum up the total hours of questioning, how many hours is it? So the first time he was questioned, how many hours? 14 hours, and then second time it was 12 hours. So 14 plus 12, 26. And then this time, for the third summons, he was questioned 13 hours. So 26 plus 13, 39. Man, he could have produced like entire album packed with, 12 songs if he spent those 39 hours on making beats. Anyways, so if when you line this up with the November 5th article that we just read, the pattern kind of becomes clear. Despite 3 lengthy summons, each lasting over 12 hours, police have repeatedly acknowledged that there's been no progress and that they're still in the process of legal review and analysis. That's why many observers think that the third round of questioning may have been more procedural than making, revelations, and suggesting that they still haven't found decisive evidence to justify an arrest warrant. We'll have to see. But, so far, things have been taking place very slowly. So, in the weeks leading up to this November 5th questioning, the tone of the investigation had already begun to shift, because on October 20th, police officials openly admitted that there had been no significant progress in the case and that their focus had turned toward legal review rather than the discovery of new evidence. And that statement hinted at growing fatigue within the investigation, which is a recognition that after months of interviews and document analysis, little had emerged that could substantiate the more serious allegations. And I think against this backdrop, Bang Si-hyuk's third summons that just happened in early November seems less like a breakthrough and more like a continuation of a stalled process. The earlier October briefing helps explain why. investigators were still struggling to piece together a clear legal theory, and the latest session appeared to be part of the same ongoing effort. So, yeah, if that's the case, the November 5th interrogation then was not a new chapter so much as a prolonged one, the latest in a series of procedural steps in a case that has yet to reveal any, new or decisive evidence of wrongdoing. Now, let me briefly review this article from November 3rd, because I think this gives important context to why the investigation has dragged on without visible progress, because it shows that the Seoul Metropolitan's Police Major Crimes Division, the same team handling Bang Si-hyuk case, is now drowning in work. And ever since the government confirmed the abolition of the prosecutor's office in Korea, 검찰, and announced the creation of the new Serious Crimes Investigation Agency, almost every politically or economically sensitive case has been redirected to the police, the article says. And the result is an overburdened system in the middle of a major institutional transition. And the Major Crimes Division, 광역수사단, it has become the default destination for high-stakes investigations that would once have gone to prosecutors. From lawmakers accused of election violations to corporate executives suspected of embezzlement, all those cases. Now, officers, quoted in this article admitted that the flood of cases has made even routine briefings and evidence reviews difficult because they are drowning in work. And they described mounting fatigue and a growing risk of delays or errors simply because there are not enough people to handle the caseload. So, basically I just summed up the article instead of reading the whole thing. So placed against that backdrop, I think Bang Si-hyuk's repeated summons start to look less like a sign of new breakthroughs and again, more like a symptom of bureaucratic strain. I mean, the police may genuinely be struggling to complete document analysis and legal review under extreme workload pressure. And that aligns with earlier statements from the department that there had been no progress and that they were still reviewing legal grounds. Not because of deliberate stalling necessarily, but because the system itself is congested. And as this article points out, the timing of this case makes it particularly, interesting because the new investigation agency will not be established until late 2026, leaving the police to cover a gap of almost a year. And during that time, they must handle complex corporate and financial crimes while avoiding procedural errors that could later undermine prosecutions once the new structure takes over. And that institutional uncertainty encourages caution and prolongs investigations that require clear legal footing, like Bang Si-hyuk's case. So, again, overall, I think, Hitman Bang's super long, super drawn out question reflects more than the strength or weakness of evidence. It rather exposes the growing pains of Korea's law enforcement system as it shifts power from prosecutors to police. And the officers probably investigating him are not only managing, one of the country's most high-profile corporate cases, but also navigating a justice system in flux. And that makes every step of the process slower, heavier, and politically riskier than usual. So we'll have to see. By the way, sorry, the picture, this picture is the headquarters building for Seoul Metropolitan Police, Provincial Special Detective Corps, instead of the, the Major Crimes Division. Okay. Now, based on everything revealed in recent months, though, most of the core allegations against Bang Si-hyuk have already been addressed or diffused by public facts and investor records. and I have already made multiple videos about that. So let's quickly go over. I have summarized nicely for you here. So the entire case, if you think about it, stems from the Securities and Futures Commission's claims that before HYBE's IPO, Pang-hyuk created the false impression that the listing would be delayed, IPO would be delayed, leading early investors to sell. Yet, when you look closely, this claim struggles to stand on solid ground because the supposed quote-unquote victims, like major venture funds like LB Investment, Legend Capital, and Alphen Route, they all exited for their own business reasons, not because they were misled. And their funds, for example, their funds were reaching maturity, and some of them were under pressure from limited partners, and some were dealing with the fallout of the major crisis, like Lime Asset Management crisis. So each party sold voluntarily, locked in huge profits, and nobody's ever filed a complaint or lawsuit after HYBE went public. In fact, LB publicly celebrated its gains, boasting of a 100 billion Korean won profit from the big hit investments. And the SFC's own language shows how weak the deception claim really is. Because unlike cases where clear lies or deceptions were proven, the commission only said Pang-hyuk made it seem like the IPO would be delayed, which is a phrasing that stops short of alleging an actual false statement. Because IPO schedules are rarely fixed, right? And they change frequently depending on market and business conditions. And that makes it extremely difficult to prove that any messaging about timing was intentionally deceptive or designed to manipulate investors. And the contracts that are under examination, like the earnout and putback option agreements, are also pretty standard in the investment world. Like earnouts reward executives only if a deal succeeds, while putback options require them to buy back shares if the IPO fails. So, in other words, they share both upside and downside. So it's far from being like a dirty profit sharing scheme. This kind of structure is common risk allocation between company founders and private equity funds. And industry insiders have pointed out that the first Easton Fund, which was created in mid-2019, actually favored investors by excluding earnouts altogether, while the second fund, which was created months later after BTS had a breakthrough globally, it adopted standard market terms because demand was high. Demand for big hit shares was so high. And the accusation that Pang-hyuk colluded with former HYBE CIO Kim Jung-dong has also lost weight over time, because records show that Mr. Kim wasn't an internal executive when the funds were established, and that they were managed by independent general partners with outside capital. And the connection between the two, doesn't in itself prove collusion or misconduct. And critics once argued that the earnout agreement should have been disclosed during the IPO, but even that point, that argument is legally ambiguous, because at the time, such side contracts weren't always considered quote-unquote material information under disclosure laws, and HYBE's filings were reviewed by multiple law firms and underwriters. And the impact of those contracts was already visible in shareholding disclosures, which makes it difficult to show any intent to conceal. Now, perhaps most tellingly, no actual financial damage has been demonstrated, right? Because the early investors made profits. Even the National Pension Service profited on both sides of the pre-IPO funds. And the supposed retail investor losses after listing were no worse than those of other IPOs in the same period. So it has, without a clear victim or measurable loss, it's hard to sustain a charge under the Article 178 of the Capital Markets Act, which was designed to punish public market fraud, not private transactions between a handful of sophisticated funds. So at this stage, the case looks less like deliberate fraud and more like a complex dispute over timing, perception, and maybe regulatory interpretation. And the key questions for the court will be pretty narrow. If this case ever enters the court, whether Pang Si-hyuk intentionally misrepresented IPO plans, or whether the earnout contract should have been disclosed, and whether anyone truly suffered a financial loss. But on the facts so far, all of these three questions seem doubtful, which suggests that the allegations may ultimately collapse under the weight of their own ambiguity rather than any decisive, exoneration. So, yeah, at this point, the future of Pang Si-hyuk case appears more procedural than explosive, unless investigators uncover genuinely new and material evidence, something that hasn't already been scrutinized by regulators or investors or the media. It is unlikely to escalate into a criminal indictment that can withstand judicial review. I don't know. We'll see. We'll have to see. And it depends on other factors, like the governmental and political factors as well. So we'll see. But if you think about it, this case has been public for nearly a year. And every alleged irregularity has already been dissected by both financial authorities and journalists. And in South Korea's media climate, we all know about, any fresh or damaging revelation would have surfaced immediately and dominated headlines, particularly given Pang Si-hyuk's profile as a founder of HYBE and his long list of rivals in the industry and the haters. Now, the absence of such revelations after 3 extensive rounds of questioning itself suggests that there may simply be nothing substantial left to find. So from here, the case will probably move slowly through administrative and legal channels, I think, because the police must decide whether to request an arrest warrant, but that decision would require evidence of clear intent to deceive and demonstrate financial harm, both of which remain uncertain, I think, based on what we know so far. But even if prosecutors proceed, though, the defense is likely to argue that all transactions were legitimate private market deals, vetted by institutional investors, not public fraud. And in that scenario, the case would wind its way through the courts for months and years, possibly ending in dismissal or reduced civil penalty rather than a criminal conviction. So it could be kind of a drawn-out process and be boring. But the broader environment also works against the dramatic outcome, right? As we have talked about, the Seoul Police's Major Crimes Division is already overloaded amid South Korea's ongoing prosecutorial reform, and its ability to sustain a high-profile, resource-intensive financial case is pretty limited. And meanwhile, public interest has already started to shift away from allegations that have failed to produce new facts. And so for all practical purposes, I think, unless a whistleblower or document emerges that changes the entire factual landscape, the most realistic prospect is just a quiet fade. Like a long legal process that ends with ambiguity rather than a verdict that rewrites the whole thing. So, anyways, what do you think? Do you think the authorities genuinely believe there's still something to uncover, something new to uncover, or are they just hesitant to close a case without a clear resolution? And given how long this investigation has dragged on, what do you think is keeping it alive? Is it evidence, or is it politics, or is it pressure from public opinion? And do you think Pang Si-hyuk is being targeted because of his position and influence, or is it just the system doing its job, or is it something else entirely? And how much trust do you have in Korea's current investigative system, especially with all the changes happening between the police and the prosecution? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section. But as always, let's stay positive, respectful, and classy. Thank you guys. Peace and love. Bye-bye.